Welcome to Blue Line Mental Health. I'm glad you're here. If you haven't already, please take a moment to click that like button and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to hit the bell notification so you don't miss any of our new content we share. Warning: this channel may contain material that is graphic and could potentially be a trigger for some. Viewer discretion is advised. Don't say I didn't warn you. Welcome to the Blue Line Mental Health Executive Command Staff Interview Series. I'm thrilled to bring you an in-depth conversation with Chief Heather WURTH of the Shorewood Police Department. Today, we will delve into the vital topic of law enforcement mental health amid the evolving demands from the community and political landscape. Chief WURTH will share her invaluable perspective on the impact of these changes on the stress and mental well-being of our officers. We'll explore how mental health support for law enforcement has transformed over the years, and most importantly, where it needs to go. This discussion is not just a message for law enforcement officers, but for the entire community, as we navigate together towards a more supportive and understanding future. Let's dive in.
So my name's Heather WURTH. I've been in law enforcement going on 31 years now, 32 years now. I can date myself, but first 28 years my career spent in Milwaukee Police Department. I retired in 2020 and took about a year and a half off after I left law enforcement, went to the private sector. In 2022, I went back into law enforcement as the chief of the Shorewood Police Department. And coming in May, I have been there 3 years as their police chief. Yeah. So of course in Milwaukee we had, I don't know, 1,600 officers and large agency. I mean, I've got a fraction of that, like 100% less than that. I'm not good at math, so don't quote me on the percentage there. But we have 25 total sworn officers that include supervisors and myself. So it's a very small agency. And like I mentioned, we don't have all the specialty units. We don't have the ability to ride motorcycles or to work on task forces and those types of things. So, the challenge in a smaller agency is how do you motivate people to continually do their job when they don't have advancement opportunities such as promotion or special assignments? And the truth is that motivation has to be intrinsic, right? That our officers have to find it within themselves to continually develop themselves, their career, and look for opportunities that they can engage in education or training and make positive contributions to the agency. Now, I mentioned some of the scrutiny that we're under, and what's really important about that and our way to combat that and have a professional organization is that our officers are they're professionally trained, and that they're continual learners. Law enforcement policing is advancing every single day by leaps and bounds. Certainly from my time when I started in 1992 to now, I mean, we've seen myriad changes in law enforcement, and there's always this expectation that we're going to continue to grow, that we're going to continue to evolve, and our officers have to do the same. So the motivation has to be within themselves, that they're going to continue to develop their skill sets. Everything from tactical skill sets to social skill sets and everything in between. In a smaller agency, also, we have to rely on each other that much more. I mean, we are truly a family, a small family because we're much smaller in size, but we don't have the breadth of support internally that we might in a large agency. So, our relationships, our camaraderie internally is something that's certainly different as well. And then, just the sheer size of or lack of size in the village of Shorewood. I mean, we're only 1.9 square miles apart. So, we often find ourselves in situations where it might seem boring. And of course, in law enforcement, you have 90% of your time is boredom, driving around and patrolling, and then 10% of sheer excitement when you get that call. And that's not unlike Shorewood, but we just don't have the frequency of that. But some distinct changes. But I think law enforcement, regardless of the size of the agency, shares a lot of commonalities with the calls that you respond to, the people who are drawn to law enforcement, community support, those types of things. So. Not unlike any other law enforcement agency, we are fortunate in the village of Shorewood not to experience the levels of violent crime that many other communities face. Yeah, we certainly have had our share of violent calls. Um, we've had a non-fatal shooting. We've had a homicide. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a bank robbery. Fortunately, non-violent bank robbery, but um, we, like I said, are very fortunate not to experience high levels of violent crime. So we predominantly deal with thefts, motor vehicle thefts, thefts of packages, retail thefts, those types of things. Those are really driving our calls for service. And of course, we respond to calls of individuals experiencing mental crisis, unhoused individuals having mental crisis is a call that we respond to quite frequently in the village of Shorewood as well. I'd like to say that, particularly in Shorewood, that our officers are serving the community. We are a very community-driven agency, and it's something that I profess to all of my officers that that's ultimately who we serve is the community. We're there for their protection, for their safety, and to bolster public support, community relationships, those types of things. But the truth is, we serve everybody. We serve those who hire us and fund us because they have viewpoints of what they expect from our police department. And so to serve their needs and requests, we serve the public and we serve each other as well. I mean, especially in smaller agencies, well, in any agency, any law enforcement agency, we're responsible to one another. We ride in one person units. So our backup is literally the next officer working with you. We don't have an additional officer in the car to respond to assignments. So, being able to back each other up and respond to calls and do what needs to be done, especially in a smaller community. So serving each other is really important as well. I don't know that the rank had anything so much to do with that. One of the great things when I worked in Milwaukee and certainly as a captain, we were given a lot of autonomy. So we were able to make decisions that I'm not sure other captains before me had the ability to do. Um, so I really appreciated that, and I think that it really helped develop my skill sets to achieve the next rank of chief. But decisions from being able to manage shift assignments of off days of equipment of building improvements, so on and so forth. So a lot of that is very similar to a chief. I didn't have as much control over the budget as a captain that I do now as the chief. So those decisions are a little bit different and a little bit more advanced. And I was fortunate in Milwaukee to have worked for the office of the chief, so I was able to see a lot of the inner workings of some of the decisions that I'm now obligated to make as the chief. So the exposure to that and to working so closely with a couple of the chiefs really helped. Um, I think really helped for me to to ascend to the position of chief. Ah, not really, not really. I I mean, I mentioned it a little bit, you know, the volume of calls that we respond to. And I think, I mean, perhaps in line with that, the one of the stark differences is we just don't have the repetition in calls, especially violent calls, that we did in Milwaukee. So um, when we've had to respond to those calls, our practice is a little rusty sometimes. But I think our officers fall back into doing exactly what needs to be done and why it needs to be done and ensuring scene integrity and those types of things. But we don't have the volume of practice like an agency in Milwaukee or some other larger agencies might have. I think that's probably the one of the biggest differences. I'm sure you're probably going to get really similar answers to this, but recruiting and retention has probably got to be one of the biggest issues facing law enforcement today. Uh, Law enforcement is in a crisis right now, and there's lots of reasons and behind the recruiting and retention crisis. A lot of that has to do with public sentiment towards law enforcement, the dangers faced by law enforcement officers. Um, you know, people just not wanting to get into the law enforcement field anymore. Public scrutiny, oversight, lots of reasons. I guess I'm not sure that people find law enforcement a rewarding career like they used to. Certainly not when I was young, where it was an honor and a privilege to be able to serve our community, to serve our residents, and I'm not sure that that exists anymore. And I think, you know, partly other fields and, you know, 2020 certainly changed a lot of things for us for many reasons. The pandemic, the law enforcement um, views, public sentiment towards law enforcement. But with some of the scrutiny and some of the other professions being allowed to work from home, I think that's really negatively impacted law enforcement. And then retention, I think, you know, it goes back to, um, you know, agencies, because we're in a crisis right now for recruiting, agencies are offering more money, better benefits, and we see law enforcement officers hopping from agency to agency to agency. Um, and, you know, certainly smaller agencies like mine don't have some of the specialized units, some of the promotional opportunities that especially younger officers are seeking for career development, for advancement. So I mean, those are potentially retention issues as well. And law enforcement agencies across the country, mine included, are suffering from budget cuts. And, you know, I guess from that standpoint, our communities, our cities, our villages, our towns have to invest in the public safety that they expect and demand. And we're not seeing that. We're seeing cuts across law enforcement, um, and it's having a negative impact. So I think recruiting and retention is probably um, one of the biggest crises law enforcement faces. But certainly in that explanation that I gave, there are lots of other things that I've mentioned as well. Yeah, you know, I mentioned it in my opening. Public scrutiny, I think, is one of the most significant challenges that we're facing in law enforcement right now, what the sentiment is towards law enforcement. And, you know, throughout my career, I've seen the pendulum swing from support to non-support, back to support, non-support, and hopefully we're swinging back towards support now. But Gosh, it's that's been a challenge for sure. Yeah, I think what the body worn cameras allow a great insight into policing, into law enforcement, into doing the things that we do. And of course, with that comes uh, publications on social media sites, on other platforms, and so we are in the public eye a great deal. And unfortunately, there have been a number of high-profile incidents that have really tarnished who we are and what we do in law enforcement. And that has a sweeping effect about the sentiment in law enforcement. And it's widespread. We often get painted with the same broad brush in law enforcement. And unfortunately, what people are seeing is the negative side of law enforcement. And the use of force, in particular, the use of deadly force, the use of force against individuals that are experiencing crisis, is something that is can hurt our law enforcement agency, especially if people don't understand the hows and whys of what we do. Uh, but it's our role and it's our responsibility in law enforcement to help educate our public. And so the demands, um, greater transparency, and I think body worn cameras do that for us. I think having good community relationships is going to be crucial, and building community trust and public trust in law enforcement, so that when something does happen, and I say when because it's inevitable, when something happens, that the community has the ability to give you not the benefit of the doubt, but allow you time to provide them with information and process what has transpired, and being able to explain in full transparency, or in as much transparency as you can without harming the investigation, um, and your community trusting that you're providing them with the information, and they support your efforts in light of what could potentially be a high profile incident. So transparency is probably one of those oversight is also, and that goes along with transparency, and how our politicians, elected officials, our community looking at what we do, and what role do they play in making sure that their expectations of us are known and that we're meeting their expectations. So, one of the good things about body worn cameras is that I think it's had a very positive impact on law enforcement, in that without body worn cameras, people weren't able to fully see what we experienced. And by sharing some of those videos, and not snippets of some cell phone video that's caught, but the entirety of a body worn camera, is certainly beneficial, because it gives a bird's eye view of what transpired, and like I said, not just a snippet. There are of course downsides to body worn cameras as well, because we have officers who don't behave as professionally as they should, and unfortunately that's not just in law enforcement. That's every profession. But I think that there are certainly some benefits to law enforcement with the body worn cameras. And it seems to me as though, with squad cams, certainly before I left Milwaukee, there were officers who wouldn't take out a squad that didn't have a squad camera in it. Uh, you know, One of the things that body worn cameras can also help to do is protect officers from false complaints, from false narratives, and really showcase the good work that we're doing, as well as capturing some of the maybe less than professional or unprofessional actions that our officers may, from time to time, engage in. There's so many messages, I think, but one of the most important messages, and that I'd like to get out, is that we're human, and we feel, we cry, we bleed, we suffer. Um, We are subject to making split-second decisions in often less than desirable conditions. And sometimes they go very good, and sometimes they don't. But ultimately, at the end of the day, most of the officers, and certainly the officers that I've served with, get into law enforcement because they truly want to help. Now, I know that that sounds cliche, but there is a service-driven character about most of the law enforcement officers that I've met. And we're in this for the right reasons, for the good reasons, and have a true passion to serve and a dedication to do that. I think sometimes we're seen as having a crystal ball and being able to know everything in advance of a call that we go to, or whatever circumstance that we may experience. But the truth of it is that we don't. And that's one of the great things about law enforcement is no two calls are ever the same. But you have to be prepared for so many varying instances or calls. And we face a lot of challenges in law enforcement. And, we do so under intense scrutiny, intense conditions. And yeah, we're human. I think that's one of the most important things that I'd like to get out to the community is we see so many things and experience so many things, and that has a compounding effect on us. And we are expected to be everything to all people, and it's hard. It's really, really hard to do those things and to do them well 100% of the time. Uh, and I say that I don't want to focus on the fact that we mess up, but the truth is we mess up sometimes. But 99.9% of the time, we get it right, or we get it right in as much as the circumstances that we know or that we're able to see. And no police officer ever wants to go out there and get it wrong or place themselves or anybody else with whom we have contact in a dangerous or unsafe or deadly situation. It's just, we don't go out every day thinking that the worst is going to happen to us or somebody else. But the truth is it does. And it's very, very hard. It is about time that we're talking about mental health and policing. And it has been a very, very long time coming. Yeah. When I was in brand new 1992, I remember being told as a young officer, as a brand new officer, and especially as a female, to never cry, ever, to never admit that you needed to talk to somebody, that you were seeking counseling. And God forbid you should ever admit that you were on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. I mean, you would have been absolutely shunned if you'd ever admitted that out loud to anybody. And yeah, I remember being told that distinctly. Don't ever talk about that, because that's not what we do. That's not who we are. Um, and I think that there was a lot of fear too, that if you ever admitted that you needed help, that, well, she's crazy, or, and I hate to use that word, but I mean, that's what we said. And, that maybe you were unstable, or there would be a concern about whether or not you should carry a gun, and especially as a woman, being overly emotional. But we have definitely come a very long way, and we have a very long way to go yet, but we're finally starting to talk about it. Um, Mental health came about 50 years ago. I mean, when we talk about uh, shell shock and post traumatic stress, especially with our veterans, and why it took so long for that to be recognized in law enforcement, I don't know. Um, I certainly there's a stigma attached to mental health concerns in law enforcement, and I think it also comes down to the ability of whether or not you're unstable or able to possess a firearm, or whether or not you're suited to be in law enforcement. Um, but it's we're normalizing having conversations about the cumulative effects of stress and the traumas that we face every day. And I think that that's a very, very good thing. And that really goes back to what I was talking about when I said that we're all human. And I don't know what the statistic is, but we will see, I think it's something like over 500 traumatic events in our careers. And the normal person will see maybe one or two in their lifetime. And we'll see over 500 in our careers. Now think about that, and what that does to a person, and how that impacts your psyche and your confidence and your ability to cope. And um, I mean, there are some things that will live with us forever, just like individuals who have seen traumatic events, whether they've been a victim of crime or those types of things. They'll they'll live with those things forever. And ours is just amplified. Um, so for us to be able to talk about it, for us to develop peer support programs, for us to normalize debriefings and mental health wellness checks, which my agency does every year. It's mandated. Um, I, I I think it's so critical. And, not only that, but I think it's important for our officers to know that we actually care about them, that we care about their mental health and all encompassing their physical well being, their mental well being, their spiritual well being, whatever helps them to be a more well rounded and healthy individual. Um, is really important. Yeah, and this really goes down to what I just said, talking about it. Um, in Shorewood, we mandate wellness checks one time a year, but we also fund additional sessions for the officers that may need it. So funding is really important because that care doesn't come for free, right? And so I think that there may be less of uh, a agreement to seek assistance if officers had to use their insurance. I know that, and this goes back to the stigma, right? If I'm using my insurance to support mental health treatment, is somebody going to find out about that? Is my record's going to be disclosed for whatever reason? And if we're making every single officer do mental health wellness checks and providing them opportunities for counseling within that vein, it like I said, it creates this normalcy for, well, it's not just me, it's them too, right? So it makes it easy to go in and talk to somebody if you need help. But we talk about it pretty regularly, and we talk about it from the aspects of not just saying I need help, but what are some of the things that I can do to help myself? Like, how can I look after myself to, work out or be fit or eat right or get enough sleep or not drink too much or stay off my phone and, not scroll social media until the wee hours in the morning or those kinds of things. So, having those conversations. So it isn't just about the need for counseling or saying I'm struggling, but implementing those small things that we can do every single day self-care, talking about that, about providing opportunities for self-care, about downtime. Certainly those are things that I'd like to employ in my agency. Budget, of course, I mean, that's a struggle, as I mentioned. So being able to fund that is important, but we really just need to get to the point where like I said, we're talking about it and having those conversations. So yeah, I talked about that just a little bit, but I think, like I said, we're finally normalizing talking about mental health issues, and we've seen conferences, peer support conferences. We've seen mental health wellness symposiums, certainly in the state. I know that they're occurring in other states, um, but yeah, like I said, I think the most important thing is that we're finally normalizing talking about it when we're recognizing the impacts of stress has not just on our careers but our lives and how it impacts our family, our children. Um, yeah, so we've come a very, very long way, and we still have a very long way to go. It's that there's still a stigma attached to law enforcement and mental health, um, and but it's changing. It is definitely changing. When I worked in internal affairs, one of the greatest things that we ever did at internal affairs, um, and I bring that up because um, when we talk about misconduct, sometimes misconduct can be driven by a person's mental state, their physical state, their well-being, their overall well-being. And so one of the things that we ultimately did when I was at Internal Affairs was we looked at the whole person and we looked at the behavior. And so when we considered the allegation or the alleged act of misconduct, were there mitigating factors in what transpired? Um, so if it was an off-duty incident, um, that it involved alcohol, was it an ongoing issue? Was it a one-off? Was it something that the person had been seeking help for or seeking treatment? Was there an admission that they were struggling with addiction issues or familial issues, relationship issues, whatever the case may be? So we looked at the whole person, and then secondarily to any potential discipline that may be imposed was what other resources could we afford this individual to help them get back to a place where they were in a good state and would not face potential or future disciplinary issues because of these underlying causes. So, um, internal affairs, my time at internal affairs was really eye opening to me. And that's where I really started to develop my interest in mental health and mental health issues, causes of mental health issues. Because when we looked at individuals, we knew that they were experiencing something. And of course, there were acts of misconduct that were just bad, right? And but more often than not, we were intervening with individuals before it rose to the level of discipline. So the positive impact that internal affairs could have with the assistance of our districts and bureaus to help a person avoid discipline or termination or whatever the case may be um, is really why eye-opening for me. So, you know, from my time at internal affairs and talking about um, like I said, some of the causes and some of the addiction. And of course, we had issues it seemed in Milwaukee, we had a span of incidents where our officers were taken into custody for drunk driving, and how do we address those, and how do we address them widespread in the department, and set specific expectations about the discipline that may occur with certainly drunk driving incidents, but more than that, like, what could we do in law enforcement to prevent it on the front end before it got to the point. And that's where it's important to engage all of our officers to understand the consequences, what behaviors may be shown by individuals suffering from addiction or relationship issues or whatever the case may be, to how do we address that before it rises to the level of point where it gets to internal affairs or discipline or those kinds of things. So, it really needs to be a widespread conversation. And it's really incumbent, certainly as a supervisor, I don't know everything. I don't know what some of my officers are doing off duty, but other officers know. And we don't normalize having conversations about that, about officers saying to somebody, hey, I think this officer is having a problem, or we as supervisors recognizing on-duty behaviors that are outside of the norm of what we've seen from an officer, and stepping in to address some of those things. I mean, we're really, that could be a failure to our officers and put them in a position where they're having to ultimately end their career, willingly or unwillingly. But yeah, it's really incumbent upon all of us. Well, ideally, I'd like all of my officers to be trained in peer support, because I think that is one of the simplest ways that we can have a positive influence on one another. To have that training and knowledge about what to look for, about what to recognize in individuals. And that's not to say that, we don't inherently know or notice differences in somebody who is struggling. But ideally, I'd like to see everybody in peer support. I'd like department psychologists to be embedded in every single police agency. I'd like to see every police agency have a therapy support dog about our community, to support our efforts in taking care of our officers, and our overall care. Everything from mental health support to physical well-being to spiritual well-being. So, I think some of those things that I mentioned are very tangible for us, but also for our officers to talk about it regularly, for us to have debriefs, and for us to have this as a part of our daily conversations, that we do struggle, and it's not weakness to admit the need for help. Up, I hope. um, it really can only go up. But this podcast or this show is going to be a really great start. I think the exposure that we in law enforcement have to talk about our stories, to talk about the challenges we face, to talk about the struggles that we face, to provide insight to our communities about our humanity, is absolutely critical, because our community can do a lot to support our wellness. I mentioned funding is one thing, and probably a very important thing, but we've seen instances where our community has been integral to our wellness. Certainly in critical incidents where we've had law enforcement line of duty deaths, and the show of public support was incredible, and that's a start. That bolsters how we feel about ourselves, about the work that we're doing in the community, and that is that's a component of our overall mental health and wellness and well-being, to know that we're supported by the community, not just financially, but when bad things occur, that they care.
With every interview, I give the law enforcement member the opportunity to talk about an event that affects them to this day. Through their stories, we witness their emotions and humanity, revealing the deep personal impact these events have had on their lives.
Yes. Several. I wasn't going to do this. Several. I think um, I've told this story before, but there was, it was New Year's Eve, um, and I was working with another officer in District 3, and we had several arsons, um, and we had squads on those scenes of those arsons. Around the area of 24th and Brown, we had squads stationed to secure the houses until the fire investigators could come out. Well, it's New Year's Eve in the city of Milwaukee, and what happens on New Year's Eve is shots are fired. Lots of shots are fired, and my partner and I got called to a shooting, and I said to my partner, we need to be careful. Had been driving around that area with the windows down, and I'm not gonna lie, we both had our weapons on our lap, because we didn't know if there was a circumstance where, we could potentially have been ambushed, or if we needed to defend ourselves or somebody else. And we got called to a shooting on 19th and Vine. And we had parked maybe a block and a half away, because we didn't know what we were going to encounter, whether or not there was a like I said, whether we were walking into an ambush. We just didn't know. But we got to the door, and I remember the door being locked, and we were banging on the door to get somebody to open it. And finally, we were getting ready to kick the door in, and finally, a young child came down and opened the door. We walked into the house, and immediately when we walked into the house, there's a staircase that went up and to the right. Um, what struck me is I could hear kids screaming, and the staircase, there was a trail of handprints in blood that went the entire length of the staircase upstairs. And we walked inside or upstairs, and in one room, there was a victim, a 13-year-old girl that had been shot. And there were, I don't know how many kids, a lot, screaming. And I said to my partner, she's like, what can I do? And I'm like, just get these kids out of here. And so I'm looking at this 13-year-old girl. Sorry. She's laying there. She shot somewhere, and I can't find where she shot. But seemed like it took the fire department forever to get there. Probably wasn't forever. Seemed like time stopped. I remember her saying, tell my mom I love her. And she died.
this young girl put in a position to care for these kids on New Year's Eve. Not even 13. Just that call will be with me forever. Yeah, that was probably one of the single hardest calls I ever had to handle. I will never forget it, ever. Just watching this young girl just die right there, and there was nothing that I could do. Sorry. Yeah, I tell that story sometimes, and this is the reaction I get every single time I tell that story. And it was 1999, so imagine that. 25 years ago, I think, 25 years ago. I mean, there's been other calls. I mean, I remember getting the call when Chucky died, and I wasn't in town. The call when Matt died, or Koo died, or, you know, those are calls or instances that I'll never forget. And of course, I mean, so many more. And, you know, one of the things in law enforcement that we try to do is compartmentalize the calls that we go to, or the things that we see, or the traumas that we face. Because I think if, you know, you truly open yourself up to reliving those horrors every single day, just, you know, would you be able to do this job for a 25 or 30-year career? I don't know, you know. So being able to deal with some of those things, those are some of the calls I'll never ever forget. Houses that you drive by where you know, think, oh, I handled that there, or I met this person there, or you know, the shootings, the fatal accidents, the, you know, just the horror that's committed against people. And, you know, when you worked in Milwaukee for as long as I did, you know, you have all of those memories, or intersections, or houses, or areas that, you know, that you can drive through, and something always reminds you of something that you saw or handled, or
All I can say is thank you. I appreciate you very much.
Well, thank you. I mean, this has been an honor to be here and to be a part of this. I think, you know, for us to have these conversations is, like I said, so critically important, and to share our stories. Yeah.
Brings humanity out of us.
It really does. It really does. And this is the side of us, of law enforcement, that people need to see, that we are human, and it is within all of us to do the best that we can. And certainly in law enforcement, that's what we want to do, the best that we can. But we need help, we need support, and we need the community to be a part of that.
Thank you for watching this video on our channel. If you found this content meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share to spread awareness and make a difference, one step at a time.